On to the next section, we're going to look at omega-3s. Obviously, we're looking at it from we'll look at it from a general health perspective and a performance, maybe recovery perspective. First and foremost, what are omega-3s?
So omega-3s, there's two different types you'll find, EPA and DHA. So EPA in particular is more kind of around heart health, whereas the DHA is more around kind of brain health, cognitive health, eye health. And ultimately, they're labelled as the essential fatty acids. So that's what they effectively are. They're a fatty acid. And they're labelled as essential because the body can't synthesize them itself. So we have to get them from our foods, or as some people might do, from the supplements. Primarily, you tend to get them from oily fish. So salmon, all the bad smelling fish if you don't really like it. So mackerel, sardines, tuna, even kind of smaller amounts in nuts and seeds as well. But the kind of best natural source that you'll find are going to be those oily fish, which pose its own issues, particularly when you come to youth athletes and getting those omega-3s in. Because like I say, you have to get them from your diet. The body can't produce them itself.
Yeah, let's simplify that a little bit. So you're saying omega-3s are fatty acids. What are fatty acids? So
fatty acids are basically a fatty compound that you find in your fat products, like I mentioned, from your fish products. You'll find them in saturated fat products as well, unsaturated fat products. There's lots of different types of fatty acids. Generally people label them as the essentials, which is your omega-3s. Your non-essentials, which the body can produce itself anyway, so your unsaturated and your saturated fats, or the good and the bad fats.
So omega-3s is something we all need daily. They're essential fatty acids which we can't make ourselves in the body, that's right?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, and the sources, you've said fatty fish and nuts, things like nuts and seeds is smaller amounts in. Yeah. Does everyone need them?
Yeah, everyone needs them, and particularly in my experience, a lot of it is, particularly for omega-3s, around growth, development, maturation, and particularly for youth athletes, that's where it can get complicated. In my experience, anyway, if I'm comparing kind of older, more experienced athletes, kind of youth athletes, we probably all know some niece or nephew or younger cousin that might be a little bit of a fussy eater, where they don't particularly like those sources we've mentioned there, so your fish, your nuts and your seeds and things like that, where it can then make it more difficult to get those omega-3s in on a day-to-day basis. And we should be aiming for 2 to 3 grams on a day-to-day basis, but that's where it might get confusing, because on a lot of your labels it'll be in milligrams. So looking at 200 to 300 on a day-to-day basis if it's in milligrams rather than grams per day. But yeah, I think everyone does need to take it, because ultimately, or not necessarily take a supplement, but get it from their foods if they can. Like me as a nutritionist, I'm all about food first. Like we talked about at the start, your diet is the foundation, and those supplements are the cherry on top. But there are maybe those scenarios, particularly with things like omega-3s, which I'm sure we'll come on to, where they might be necessary because you're not getting them from your diet.
Okay, couple of things. You told us the kind of daily dosage we need, and you said milligrams and grams. We don't understand this. I've got some omega-3s here. So my protein, essential omega-3s. What's the dosage on there? And if I was to source my omega-3s only from supplements, how many of them would I need a day?
So these ones, to be fair, total omega-3 fatty acid content, 300 milligrams in one soft gel. So one of these tablets on a day-to-day basis. 180 grams of EPA. 180 milligrams, 120 milligrams of DHA. So you're going to be meeting that 300 milligrams a day, or 2 to 300. So these, to be fair, aren't a bad one to take. Ideally, thinking with my nutritionist brain on, I'd want you to get it from your fish products, your natural food sources, but I know there's a lot of people out there that might even be allergic to fish, for example. or they don't like eating fish, they don't like the taste, they don't like nut seeds, or might be allergic to nuts and seeds, for example. So using something like these from My Protein, obviously in checking form for sport first of all, if you're an athlete out there, but something like this could be useful in terms of making sure they're getting those omega-3s in on a day-to-day basis. Because ultimately we don't want to become deficient in these omega-3s, because a lot of these supplements, particularly kind of things like multivits or omega-3s and things like that, they're there to combat those deficiencies if you can't get them from your foods.
How many of them would I need daily if I didn't eat any fish?
One of these.
One a day.
Yeah, one a day. And you've got 250 soft gels in there. So you've got quite a significant storage there, to be fair. You've got quite a few, so they should last you a while.
Cool. So remind me how much we need a day. We said it in grams, milligrams. You say 3 to 4.
2 to 300.
2 to 300
milligrams. Not 2 to 300 grams.
2 to 300 milligrams.
2 to 300 grams is a hell of a lot.
Milligrams a day. Okay. So obviously you're recommending food first approach. That's a really great approach. But obviously there's some challenges. Don't like fish, allergic to fish. And a lot of omega-3s are in fatty fish, and some fatty fish contain like certain levels of mercury. What are the recommendations in terms of consuming fatty fish a week?
Yeah, so 2 oily fatty fish portions a week. I think a lot of people get concerned about mercury, particularly in terms of canned fish. So like we mentioned, like tuna, mackerel, things like that. Generally, they tend to come in tins, sardines. So if we are having those oily fish portions, try and stick to 2 a week. Because it will help to get those omegas in. But also, again, we don't want to go too far in terms of fat content, first of all. Because fat, in terms of your macronutrients in comparison to your carbohydrates and your protein, is the most energy dense in 9 calories per gram. So that can sometimes, particularly for the kind of general population, make it more difficult to maintain energy balance, to maintain the weight, depending on what the goals are, or some people might try to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight. So it can be more difficult to maintain that if you're having a higher fat intake. But the good thing is with those oily fish products, they're getting your omega-3s, but you're also getting unsaturated fats in there as well.
So if you can only really have them twice a week, then fatty fish, is that another barrier to meeting your daily omega-3 recommended intake?
Not necessarily, because if you're having a varied and balanced diet, you can get them from those couple of fish portions a week. So it might be a portion of salmon, it might be a portion of mackerel. But then, like I mentioned earlier, they're in nuts and seeds in smaller amounts, but you can still use those nuts and seeds. So you can still use those as potentially snacks throughout your day to top them off. I think if you were going to be using that alongside your fish and your nuts, you don't necessarily need that, because like I say, yes, that will give you that daily dose that you need, but if you think about all the other things that you're going to be getting from those nuts, from those seeds, from those fish products, not just the omega-3s, the protein that you're going to get from there, the healthy unsaturated fats that you're going to get from there that help to manage things like cardiovascular disease, manage blood pressure, manage things like LDL cholesterol, you're going to miss out on those things if you just take in that supplement. And that's where that food first approach, in my opinion anyway, will always win, because you're not just getting that one sole nutrient, you're getting a variety of different things in there that are going to ultimately support your health and well-being, but particularly as athletes, going to help to support your performance.
And I'm not promoting omega-3s, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So we're having our 2 sources of fatty fish a week, and you're saying we can get the nuts and seeds kind of in between and balanced diet, etc. What form of omega-3s is in nuts and seeds? It's not EPA, right? Is it ALA?
Yeah, ALA.
What's the conversion of that?
Not
specific. We can cut this out as well. I'm just doing this for fun. So obviously the conversion of ALA to whatever EPA isn't as good, right?
It isn't as effective, and that's why, particularly in terms of nuts and seeds in comparison to your fish products, they're seen as, if you want to use the term inferior source, that's why they're seen as that more inferior source in comparison to those fish products that you're going to be getting the EPA and DHAs in the more readily active form.
Okay. So what about vegans?
Yeah. Vegans, that's where it gets very, very difficult, because you can get vegan alternative omega-3s, and for vegans who, say for example, are allergic to nuts, I probably have a little bit of a look into those vegan alternative omega-3s, because like we said at the start, they're essential to your health and well-being. They're an essential nutrient. Your body's not going to be able to produce them itself, so you need to get them from some source of your diet. And if you are someone who is a vegan athlete or a vegan person, definitely have a little bit of a look into those vegan alternatives, because you still need to get those omega-3s in on a day-to-day basis. And as we mentioned, you're not going to get the same quantity of those EPAs and DHAs from those nuts and seeds. So have a little bit of a look into those vegan alternatives as that kind of bridge, really, to bridge the gap between kind of what you need and what you're kind of getting.
Okay, cool. So basically, if you're a vegan and you're allergic to nuts, you finish. Like, it ain't good for you. It ain't good. So that's hopefully answers and clears some things up around omega-3 supplementation. Actually, one more question. I forgot to even ask this. I don't think I wrote it down. Benefits for recovery.
Yeah, so anti-inflammatory in particular. So the EPAs in particular, in comparison to the DHAs, have anti-inflammatory properties. So it's that inflammatory response after particularly intense exercise that causes things like muscle soreness, DOMS as people mainly know it, delayed onset muscle soreness. Sometimes you can't help it. If you've done a particularly intense session, you're most likely going to get those DOMS, but your nutrition can at least subside some of that soreness. It won't completely eradicate it. It's not a magic bullet, unfortunately. But the anti-inflammatory properties that you will get from those EPAs can help to reduce that muscle soreness. So say, for example, if you're an elite athlete in particular, where you might be training multiple times a day, or you might be competing over multiple days in multiple stages of a competition, having those omega-3s can help to speed up that recovery process, or at least support that recovery process, so that you're ready to go for that next session or that next competition and get the best out of yourself. Because particularly with that fatigue, I know from speaking to athletes, it can, if they are feeling sore, it can play on the mind as well. Because yes, if they're feeling physically fatigued, it will probably affect the performance. But if they're feeling physically fatigued and they know they feel physically fatigued and they've not done something about it, that can also then start to impact the performance and maybe getting in their own minds a little bit.
And is 200 to 300 milligrams daily enough to have the anti-inflammatory effects? Yeah, that'll help to have that anti-inflammatory response. So making sure that you are getting in those food sources in particular is really important. Say, for example, if someone is particularly kind of struggling, if they've got day-to-day events or back-to-back events over multiple days, where they might be traveling on the road, for example, where it's not always going to be feasible for them to take fish with them, or take those products with them, using a supplement might be a practical way to get those omega-3s in. Like I said, always go for that food-first approach, but like we've talked at the start and throughout, really, there are those kind of times where it might be more practically feasible to use those supplements to get those benefits and get those, meet the aims of what we're trying to do effectively. And beyond anti-inflammatory, is there any other research, any other kind of benefits from omega-3? Any research on that?
Well, there's been research. I'm not particularly au fait with it, but there is a lot of research going into around kind of brain health and heart health and heart function in particular. Like I say, I'm not particularly au fait with it, but there's a lot more research going on around not just the performance anti-inflammatory aspects, but looking at how it can affect cognitive function, brain health, and like I say, heart health and cardiovascular health as well.
Okay, bro. Well, I'll try and wrap this up again now without asking any more questions. Hopefully that clears up any questions you might have around omega-3s and the role they can play in your diet. As I said, any questions, just pop them in the comments and we'll make sure we get them answered.